I think it was Franklin Roosevelt who famously said that when you reach the end of your rope, tie a knot in it and hang on. So as we enter 2021, I think we are hanging on by just a thread. The hospitals in Britain are almost full to capacity. The health workers are all exhausted. And the situation for the next few months is looking pretty bleak and grim, if we're honest. The lifeline that everyone's pinning their hopes to is, of course, the vaccines, which are slowly being distributed. I say that they're slowly being distributed. Well, every country is really slowly distributing their vaccines in comparison to Israel, which, of course, in the past has been dubbed the startup nation, but really it should be described and dubbed, I think, the vaccine nation. Israel is just 9 days into its COVID-19 vaccination drive, and already it's inoculated 5.7% of its population. That's more than 5 times the 1.2% reached in Britain. More Israelis now have been vaccinated than have caught the virus, and that includes more than 25% of those who are 60 years or above. Such is the power of the vaccination drive in Israel that it is predicted that the proportion of the over 60s among the critically ill is going to drop from 70% to just 20% by the mid-January. Now, it's not just Israel is ahead of all the others, but it's the pace of the rollout which is simply astonishing. And it begs the question, how is Israel succeeding where others are failing? What might other countries learn from it? The truth is that I have to pinch myself to believe that this is the very same Israel that for the last year has suffered so severely at the hands of COVID. And despite an unprecedented 3 lockdowns in the country and failing to gain a real handle on the situation of containing the virus, it now seems to be able to have turned the tide and being at the forefront of rolling out its vaccination program. So on the one hand, we have an Israel which has been so troubled by COVID and not being able to contain it, and yet it seems to succeed when it comes to the vaccine. What's changed? Will the true Israel please stand up? Golda Meir once quipped that the Jewish people are a stiff-necked nation, and that is that they refuse to take yes as an answer. And therefore, it's really unsurprising that over the last year, from across the spectrum, in Israel, the government has struggled to get the nation to listen and to adhere to the restrictions. So what has changed? How have all the sectors cooperated and worked together in vaccinating its population? Professor Alon Moses, who's the director of Hadassah Organization's Medical Department of Clinical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, he said it's really being treated now like a war. And Israel, he said, is experienced when it comes to battles. For better or for worse, Israel, and I would say the Jewish people, for that matter, have always excelled precisely when we have felt that our backs are against the wall. It happened all the way back when we left Egypt and we were pursued by the Egyptians, cornered with nowhere to run and a sea in front. We plunged ourselves into that raging sea, and of course, the rest, as they say, is history. It happened at the time of the Hanukkah story, the few against the many. And it happened after the Holocaust, when many of the survivors of concentration camps arrived in Israel with nothing but the numbers emblazoned on their arms, and they made a desert bloom. It happened again at the 6-Day War, when Israel successfully, miraculously, held off all its Arab neighbors. So therefore, Israel is a nation that thrives on the survival gene. The inner fighting and conflicts between the right and the left, the religious, the irreligious, are all put to one side when the country is able to mobilize itself into action. And so to our brothers and sisters in Israel, as we usher in 2021, and it begins now within 3 to 4 months with Israel being able to inoculate its population, I would suggest that we all pray that the fighting spirit, the survival gene, is nurtured long after the pandemic. It is the perfect antidote to many of the ills of its society. L'chaim.